I'll call you when I land. Marina Salvatierra closed her eyes upon hearing those words. 4 words she had been hearing for years. 4 words that once meant a promise, and now only sounded like empty routine. On the other side of the line, amidst the noise of engines and boarding announcements, Hector's voice sounded distant, rushed as always. I'm already at the boarding gate. The flight leaves in 15 minutes. I need to hang up. Marina pressed the phone against her ear, searching for something in that voice that was no longer there, something that perhaps never was. She opened her mouth to say what she had been wanting to say for weeks, but the words got trapped in her throat. Again. It's fine, she finally replied, with a calm that hurt more than any scream. Have a good trip. Hector paused briefly, barely a second, as if he wanted to say something else, but he didn't. He never did. He hung up with the same haste with which he lived everything, leaving Marina holding a silent phone in the middle of the empty living room of her apartment. She remained standing in front of the large window overlooking the city, watching the lights of Manhattan blink like artificial stars. Hector Salvatierra, her husband, the man who had promised her the world, was about to board a private plane heading to Singapore, or maybe it was Tokyo. She didn't remember anymore. The destinations had become irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was that he was never here. The apartment on the 45th floor of the city's most exclusive tower should have made her feel lucky. The glass walls, the custom-designed furniture, the works of art that cost more than what most people earned in a lifetime. But none of that filled the void that grew every day. Wealth, Marina discovered too late, was a peculiar kind of loneliness, a golden cage with panoramic views. 6 years ago, when she met Hector, he was different, or perhaps she simply wanted to believe he was. He was an emerging entrepreneur then, ambitious but present. He looked at her as if she were the only person in the room. He brought her coffee in bed on Sundays. They talked for hours about dreams and plans. He promised her they would build something together, that nothing would be more important than them. But dreams turned into empires, and empires demanded sacrifices. First it was the weekends, then the dinners, then entire conversations. Hector started answering her questions with distractions, looking at her without really seeing her, being physically present, but emotionally absent. And Marina, without realizing it, became a wife who waited. She waited for him to come home. She waited for him to remember their anniversary. She waited for him to call her when he landed. But the call stopped coming. "I'll call you when I land" became an automatic farewell phrase, a verbal reflex with no real intention behind it. At first, Marina checked her phone obsessively after every flight, justifying every silence with urgent meetings or time differences. But over time, she stopped waiting. And when she stopped waiting, something inside her also stopped feeling. That night, while Hector crossed the Atlantic in his private jet, Marina walked slowly through the apartment they shared only on paper. His footsteps echoed on the imported marble, every echo a reminder of how empty everything was. She passed by the dining table where they never ate together, by the sofa where they never sat to talk, by the bed where they slept back to back. 2 strangers under Egyptian silk sheets. She stopped in front of Hector's closet, suits perfectly aligned, shirts ironed with military precision, ties organized by color, everything impeccable, everything cold, everything so representative of who he had become. A man who controlled empires, but had lost control of the only thing that really mattered. Marina looked at herself in the full-length mirror. 32 years old, beautiful, according to what everyone told her, dressed in expensive clothes that no longer made her feel anything. Her hair perfectly styled for no one, makeup applied out of habit, not desire. She looked like the perfect wife of a successful man, but inside she was dying of emotional starvation. When was the last time Hector really looked at her? When was the last time he touched her face with tenderness instead of with the haste of someone who is already thinking about the next meeting. When was the last time he asked her how she was and really listened to the answer? She couldn't remember, and that inability to remember hurt more than any infidelity could have hurt. She returned to the living room and sat on the sofa looking at her phone. 10 o'clock at night. Hector must be over the ocean now, probably reviewing documents, drinking whiskey, planning his next business conquest. Definitely not thinking about her. Definitely not missing her. Marina opened the drawer of the side table and took out an envelope. She had spent the last 3 days writing the letter that was inside, drafts upon drafts, searching for the exact words to explain the inexplicable. How do you tell someone that you love them, but that you can no longer keep loving them alone? How do you explain that absence hurts more than the presence of problems? The letter was simple, direct, honest, without drama, without accusations, just the naked truth of a woman who had waited long enough. She got up and went to the bedroom. From the back of the closet, she pulled out the suitcase she had bought the week before. One at a time, she began to fold her clothes. Every garment she placed inside was a decision, a step into the unknown. She wasn't fleeing. She was choosing not to be invisible, choosing not to be a footnote in someone else's life, choosing to breathe again. The photos were the hardest part. Hector and her in Santorini, smiling under the Greek sun. In Paris, with the Eiffel Tower in the background. On their wedding day, looking at each other as if they were the only man and the only woman in the world. She observed those images and saw 2 people who no longer existed. She decided to leave them all. Those memories belonged to a life that was ending. She worked for hours methodically without tears. The tears had run out months ago, on lonely nights, when she realized she was married, but completely alone. This was simply the logical conclusion of an ending that had begun a long time ago. At 3 in the morning, the apartment was reorganized, her things packed, the spaces she had occupied empty, everything perfectly ordered, as if she had never been there. She placed the letter on Hector's nightstand, next to the photo of both of them that he kept there, but probably never looked at. Marina took her suitcase and walked toward the door. She stopped for a moment, looking back one last time. 6 years of her life were contained in those square meters of impersonal luxury. 6 years of waiting. 6 years of being enough for someone who was never really present to notice it. She turned off the lights and left, closing the door softly. The sound of the latch clicking into place sounded final, definitive. She didn't look back while the elevator descended. She didn't hesitate while the doorman wished her good night. She didn't waver while the taxi drove away from the glass tower that had been her golden prison. When Hector's plane finally landed in Singapore, 17 hours later, he turned on his phone with the usual routine. There were no messages from Marina. He wasn't surprised. He rarely knew it. He considered calling her, fulfilling for once the promise he made mechanically. But there was an important meeting in 40 minutes. He would call her later. Later never came. When Hector Salvatierra finally returned to New York 3 days later, tired but satisfied, with the deal closed, he expected to find the apartment as always, silent perhaps, but familiar. He expected to find Marina probably asleep or reading, accustomed to his absences. He opened the door and turned on the lights. Everything was impeccable. Too impeccable. He walked through the living room feeling that something wasn't right, but unable to identify what. It was then that he noticed the empty spaces, the absence of small objects that had always been there, but that he had never really looked at. He entered the bedroom, and his gaze fell on the white envelope on his nightstand. He took it with hands that were suddenly trembling. Inside, Marina's words were calm, measured, devastating. Hector read the letter standing up, unable to sit, unable to breathe properly. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't blame him directly. She only explained with a clarity that cut like glass that she had waited enough, that she deserved to be more than a pause between flights, that love without presence was just a pretty word for loneliness. At the end of the letter, there was a single line that destroyed him completely. I no longer wait for you to land, Hector, because I finally understood that even if you land, you never really arrive. Hector dropped the letter and ran to the closet, empty, to the bathroom. Her things weren't there. He dialed her number with clumsy fingers, voicemail, once, twice, 10 times. He let himself fall onto the bed they had shared for 6 years, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Hector Salvatierra felt true fear. Not the kind of fear of losing a business deal or an investment, the kind of fear that comes when you realize you've been so busy building an empire that you let your real world collapse in silence. And the worst of all was that he had no idea when exactly he had lost it. He only knew that when he finally landed, the only person who really mattered was no longer waiting. Hector dialed Marina's number for the 15th time in less than an hour. Voicemail. Again, his own voice returned the silence that now filled every corner of the apartment. He threw the phone onto the bed and ran his hands through his hair, breathing with difficulty as if he lacked air. This couldn't be happening. Marina couldn't just leave. They were a marriage. They had a life together. They had a future planned, or at least that was what he had assumed in the few moments he actually thought about it between meetings and transatlantic flights. He stood up and began to search the apartment with the desperation of someone looking for proof that it was all a nightmare. The closet was empty, except for his own clothes. The bathroom drawers didn't contain her creams, her perfumes, the small feminine things he had never noticed until they stopped being there. The shelf where she used to keep her books was bare. Even her favorite mug, that blue ceramic one she had bought at a flea market before he had money, had disappeared. Marina had methodically erased every trace of her presence, and she had done it with a precision that hurt more than any confrontation. There were no broken plates. There were no furious messages. There were no dramatic scenes, just absence. Absence so complete it was deafening. Hector picked up the letter again, reading it once more, looking for something he might have overlooked the first time. Some clue as to where she might be. Some indication that this was reversible. But the words were clear. Painfully clear. Marina hadn't left in a burst of emotion. She had left because she had stopped believing in them. She had left because he had trained her not to expect anything from him. I no longer wait for you to land, Hector, because I finally understood that even if you land, you never really arrive. Those words drove into his chest like shards of glass. They were true. He knew it. Even when he was physically present, his mind was always somewhere else, on the next contract, on the next investment, on expanding his empire, while his marriage crumbled in silence. He took his phone and called Miguel, his personal assistant. He answered on the second ring with the efficiency that characterized everyone on Hector's team. I need you to locate Marina, said Hector without preamble. Check the credit cards, flight records, anything. Now. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Miguel knew Marina. He had seen her transform from the smiling woman of the early years into the silent figure who appeared at corporate events with a perfectly rehearsed smile. Mr. Salvatierra, Miguel began carefully, are you sure that's appropriate? Now, Miguel, interrupted Hector. His voice sounded broken, desperate, so different from the tone of unwavering authority he usually used. Please. 30 minutes later, Miguel called back. There were no records. Marina had used cash for everything. She canceled her cards linked to Hector's accounts. Her phone was off or out of service. It was as if she had vanished deliberately, as if she had planned every step to be untraceable. Hector hung up and stood staring at the illuminated city beyond the glass windows. 24 hours ago, he was closing a multi-million-dollar deal in Singapore, feeling invincible. Now, he couldn't even find his own wife. The irony was cruel. He could move financial mountains, but he had lost the only person who really mattered. He poured himself a whiskey and let himself fall onto the sofa, His gaze scanned the perfect apartment, decorated by renowned designers, full of expensive objects he had never chosen personally. Marina had done all that. She had turned this space into something resembling a home, while he signed checks and approved invoices without paying attention. She had tried to build a life while he built an empire. The memories began to seep in, uninvited but unstoppable. Marina waiting for him for dinner on their second anniversary. The table decorated with candles that burned down while he was trapped in a video conference with Tokyo. Marina mentioning casually that she had gone to the doctor, something about feeling tired lately, and him barely listening because he was reviewing financial reports. Marina stopping asking him about his day because he always answered with monosyllables while checking emails. When exactly had he stopped seeing her? At what moment had he allowed her to become part of the furniture of his life, present but irrelevant? Hector got up and went to the study. He opened his laptop and began searching through files. There had to be something, some recent photo, some email, some evidence that he had paid attention. But what he found devastated him more. The last photos together were from almost a year ago at a corporate event. Marina was smiling for the camera, but Hector could see now what he had been too blind to see then. The smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were empty, sad, resigned. He kept searching and found folders full of business documents, presentations, contracts, but nothing personal, nothing about them. His digital life was an emotional desert, exactly like his real life had become. He closed the laptop forcefully and rested his head in his hands. The success he had pursued so relentlessly suddenly seemed completely hollow. What was the use of having the world if you came home to an empty apartment? What was the use of power if you couldn't protect the only thing you really loved? Because he loved her. That was what hurt the most. He had always loved her. He had simply assumed she knew it, that she would be there always, that love was enough without actions to back it up. He had taken for granted what he never should have taken for granted. The phone vibrated. For a second of irrational hope, he thought it might be Marina. But it was his mother. "Hector, I need to talk to you about Marina." His mother? Of course. Marina and she had become close in recent years, much closer than he was with either of the two. His mother had filled the void he had left, offering Marina the kind of attention and conversation he no longer provided. "Did you know she was leaving?" asked Hector without even greeting, his voice loaded with accusation and pain. There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. "Did you know she was unhappy?" his mother replied softly. "Did you know she was dying slowly in that marriage? I told her to talk to you. Did she try, Hector?" "Many times. But you were never really present to listen." The words hit like punches. "You knew, and you didn't tell me anything." "It wasn't my place to tell you," his mother replied firmly. "It was your place to notice it. It was your responsibility as a husband to see that the woman you loved was fading in front of your eyes. But you were too busy conquering the world to realize you were losing your home." Hector closed his eyes, feeling the walls closing in on him. "Where is Mom? I need to talk to her. I need to fix this." "I don't know where she is," said his mother, and he knew it was true, and even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. "Marina needs space. She needs time to breathe without you crushing her with your absence. If you really love her, give her that at least. Give her the dignity of respecting her decision." "I can't just let her go." "I'm not asking you to let her go," his mother replied, her voice softening. "I'm asking you that for the first time in years, you think about what she needs instead of what you want. Think about how you got here, and think about who you need to become if you really want a chance to win her back." The call ended, and Hector remained in the silence that now defined his life. His mother was right. Everyone was right. He had been the architect of his own destruction, building walls of indifference and absence until Marina had no other choice but to escape. He spent the rest of the night awake, roaming the apartment like a ghost in his own life. Every corner reminded him of something, The window where Marina used to stand in the mornings with her coffee, watching the city wake up. The sofa where she read while he worked on his laptop, physically together, but completely separated. The bed where they slept back to back, 2 continents on the same mattress. At dawn, Hector made a decision. He canceled all his meetings for the next week. For the first time in 5 years, he was going to stop. He was going to think. He was going to face the damage he had caused and the person he had become. But while the sun rose over Manhattan, painting the sky in golden and pink tones that Marina would have loved, Hector realized something terrifying. He knew how to close $1 million deal. He knew how to expand a business. He knew how to win at any negotiation table, but he had not the slightest idea how to win back the woman he had lost. He had no idea how to show her that he had changed when he wasn't even sure he could really change. And most terrifying of all, he didn't know if Marina still wanted to be won back, or if she had finally found the peace he never gave her. His phone vibrated with a message. His heart raced before seeing it was just his assistant confirming the cancellations. No message from Marina. No sign that she was thinking of him in the way he couldn't stop thinking of her. Hector Salvatierra, the man who never lost, had just lost the only thing really worth winning. And the cruel irony was that he had lost it exactly the way Marina had described. He landed, but never really arrived. And now that he had finally landed for real, he discovered there was no longer anyone waiting for him at home. And while Hector Salvatierra realized that he had finally landed, but there was no longer anyone waiting for him at home, I want to pause for a moment. Beautiful. Yes, I'm talking to you. I wonder where you are listening to us from right now. Maybe from your room, while the world sleeps, on the way to work, escaping routine for a few minutes. Or perhaps in a stolen moment of the day, looking for something to make you feel you aren't alone in everything you feel. Wherever you are, I want you to know that your presence here matters. This story of Marina and Hector is just beginning to unfold, and I would love to know what you think. Do you identify with Marina? Do you think Hector deserves a second chance? Let me know in the comments down below. And if this story is touching something in your heart, give me a like. It helps me enormously to continue bringing you stories worth hearing. And more importantly, I want you to know something beautiful. I read every comment, every single one, and I reply, because just like Marina deserved to be seen and heard, you deserve it too. Now, let's get back to the story, because what Marina doesn't know yet is that her decision to leave has just triggered something that will change everything. Marina opened her eyes to a ceiling she didn't recognize for a second. It wasn't the high ceiling with decorative moldings of the Manhattan apartment. It was simple, white, with a small moisture stain in the corner that needed repair. Real, imperfect, hers. She sat up in the bed of the small studio she had rented in Brooklyn, just 30 minutes from the world she had left behind, but which felt like another universe. The sheets were ordinary cotton, not imported silk. The window overlooked an alley with graffiti, not a skyline of skyscrapers. And for the first time in years, Marina woke up without the weight of disappointment crushing her chest. 5 days. It had been 5 days since she left the letter on Hector's nightstand and closed the apartment door. 5 days since she made the decision to choose herself. And although each of those days had been a battle against the temptation to return, to call, to give in, they had also been the first days in a long time that she felt capable of breathing completely. The new phone she had bought with cash rested on the nightstand. A basic model, with no connection to old accounts, no digital trail. Only her mother and 2 close friends had the number. Deliberately, she had cut all ties that could lead Hector to her, not because she was afraid of him, but because she was afraid of herself, afraid of her own weakness, afraid that his voice on the phone could crumble the resolve she had struggled so much to build. She got up and made coffee in the small coffee maker she had bought at a thrift store. The aroma filled the tiny studio, and Marina was surprised to find herself smiling. This was hers. It hadn't been chosen by an interior decorator. It didn't cost a month's salary of an average family. It was just coffee, brewed in a simple coffee maker in a modest apartment. And it was more real than anything she had had in years. She sat by the window with her cup, watching the street wake up. A man was walking his dog. A mother was pushing a stroller while talking on the phone. Ordinary life, beautiful in its normality. Marina had forgotten what it felt like to be part of the world instead of suspended above it in a glass tower. Her phone vibrated. A message from her friend Clara. "How are you today? Remember, you can come whenever you want. There is always room for you here." Marina smiled and replied with a simple, "I'm fine. Thanks." Clara had been her lifeline during the last few months, the only person besides her mother who knew how deeply unhappy she was. Clara had been the one who finally told her the words Marina needed to hear. Loving someone doesn't mean you have to disappear for them. She finished her coffee and showered in the small bathroom with worn tiles. The water didn't have the perfect pressure of luxury showers, but it was hot, and it was enough. Everything here was enough, and Marina was rediscovering that enough was more than what she had had living in excess. She dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, clothes she had bought herself in normal stores, without designer labels, without the weight of expectations. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back at her. Her face was more relaxed, less tense. The eyes, although still carrying sadness, also showed something that had been absent for a long time. Hope. She went out for a walk. She didn't have a specific destination. She just needed to move, feel the fresh air on her face, remind herself that she existed outside the four walls of any apartment. Brooklyn in the morning was a beautiful chaos. Independent coffee shops, used bookstores, farmers' markets, real people living real lives. She entered a small bookstore that smelled of old paper and coffee. It had been months since she read something just for pleasure. In the Manhattan apartment, she had stopped reading because every book felt like another form of escape from a reality that was already unbearable. But now, surrounded by shelves up to the ceiling, she felt the old excitement return. She walked the aisles with her fingers grazing the spines of the books, without hurry, without anyone waiting for her, without a schedule to keep. She chose 3 books at random: a novel about a woman who moved to Italy to start over, a poetry book about loss and rebirth, a biography of someone who had rebuilt their life from scratch. At the checkout, the clerk smiled. "Good books, especially the one about Italy. It's about finding oneself." Marina returned the smile. "That's exactly what I need." She returned to her studio with the books under her arm, feeling strangely satisfied. These were her first real purchases with her own money, earned from freelance graphic design work she had started the year before in secret. Hector never knew about that job. He never asked what she did with her time, and that neglect had turned out to be her salvation. That job, small and modest, had given her not only money, but also a sense of identity separate from being Hector Salvatierra's wife. She settled onto the small second-hand sofa and opened one of the books. But after reading only a few pages, her mind began to wander. She thought of Hector. She couldn't help it. 6 years of her life didn't just disappear because she signed a lease in Brooklyn. Would he have read the letter? Would he have tried to look for her? Part of her, a small but persistent part, wanted him to have done so. She wanted to know that her absence hurt, that finally, when it was too late, he realized what he had lost. But another part, the wiser part, knew she couldn't afford that knowledge, because if she knew he was suffering, her instinct would be to comfort him, and comforting him would mean returning, and returning would mean losing everything she had gained by leaving. Her mother had called the day before. "Hector contacted me." She had said softly, "He has destroyed Marina. He canceled all his meetings. He says he needs to talk to you." And Marina had responded with a firm voice, although her heart was trembling. "I'm not ready, Mom. Maybe I'll never be ready. He had years to talk to me, years to see me. He can't expect me to drop everything because he finally decided to pay attention." His mother had sighed, but didn't argue. She just added, "I'm proud of you, my love. I know this is the hardest thing you've done, but I see you more alive now than in the last 3 years." And it was true. Marina felt alive in ways she had forgotten were possible. The pain was there, yes. The loss was real, but so was the freedom. The freedom to make decisions without consulting someone who never listened. The freedom to eat cereal for dinner if she wanted. The freedom to cry without having to explain why. The freedom to simply be. She closed the book without having really read it and approached the small table where she had left her sketchbook. Before meeting Hector, Marina had dreamed of being an artist. She had studied design. She had had ambitions, plans. But at some point in the last 6 years, those dreams had dissolved into the routine of being the perfect wife of the perfect man. She had stopped creating. She had stopped dreaming. She had stopped being Marina and had become simply Mrs. Salvatierra. She opened the notebook to a blank page and picked up a pencil. Her hands were trembling slightly. It had been years. What if she had forgotten how? What if that part of her was dead? But when the pencil touched the paper, something inside her woke up. She began to draw without thinking, letting her hand move by instinct. Lines, shadows, shapes. She didn't know what she was creating until it began to take shape. It was a woman from behind, looking toward a horizon. Her shoulders were erect but vulnerable. Her posture suggested both loss and possibility. Marina drew for hours, lost in the act of creation. When she finally stopped, the sun was already setting, painting the sky orange and purple. She looked at her drawing and felt something move in her chest. Hope mixed with sadness, strength mixed with fear. That night, lying in her simple bed in her small studio, Marina allowed the tears to finally come. They weren't tears of regret. They were tears of mourning. Mourning for the marriage that never was what it should have been. Mourning for the years lost, waiting for someone to change. Mourning for the version of herself she had sacrificed, trying to be enough for someone who was never really there to notice it. But among the tears, there was also relief. Relief from no longer having to pretend she was fine. Relief from no longer having to smile at events while her heart was breaking. Relief from finally putting herself first. Her phone vibrated. Another message from Clara. "I love you, friend. You are the bravest woman I know." Marina smiled through the tears. She didn't feel brave. She felt broken and scared and completely uncertain about the future. But she also felt free, and maybe that was enough for now. Before falling asleep, she thought of Hector one last time. She wondered if he really understood why she had left. She wondered if he could ever become the man she needed him to be. She wondered if any part of her still wanted him to, but those were questions for another day. For now, Marina just needed to survive. She needed to remember who she was before losing herself. She needed to rebuild the pieces of her identity she had left behind when she became the invisible wife of a man too busy to see her. And as sleep finally claimed her, Marina realized something fundamental. She hadn't left Hector because she stopped loving him. She had left him because she finally loved herself enough not to accept crumbs when she deserved a full feast. That truth, painful and liberating at the same time, was the last thing she thought before falling into a deeper and more peaceful sleep than any she had had in years. 3 weeks, 21 days since Marina left, and Hector Salvatierra was a man unrecognizable even to himself. The office that was once his second home now felt like a prison. The financial reports that used to excite him now seemed completely empty to him. The meetings that previously defined his identity were now just noises without meaning. Hector had spent his adult life chasing success, measuring his worth in figures and contracts. Building an empire that he now understood was just an elaborate distraction from what really mattered. He had started therapy, not because someone suggested it, but because one night, alone in the empty apartment, he realized he didn't know how to be the man Marina needed. He didn't know how to be present. He didn't know how to love without turning it into another task on his agenda. He needed help, and for the first time in his life, he was humble enough to admit it. The therapist, a man of about 60, with a gaze that saw too much, had asked him a simple question in his first session. When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy, not because it brought you closer to a goal? Hector couldn't answer. The terrifying truth was that he didn't remember. His entire life had become a series of objectives achieved and goals surpassed. But at no moment had he simply existed, simply lived, simply been happy. Now, sitting in his office on a Tuesday afternoon, he looked out the window without really seeing the city that stretched out before him. His assistant Miguel had learned not to interrupt him during these moments. He had seen the change in his boss, the way Hector rejected meetings, delegated responsibilities, went home early, although home meant nothing anymore without Marina there. His phone rang. It was his mother. "How are you today?" she asked, as she did every other day since Marina left. "Surviving," replied Hector honestly. That was all he could say. He wasn't fine, he wasn't recovered. He was simply surviving each day with the weight of his regret. "I'm going to tell you something," said his mother after a pause, "and I want you to listen without interrupting." Hector waited, feeling that something important was coming. "I saw Marina yesterday." Hector's heart stopped. "Where? Is she okay? Did she tell you?" "Shut up and listen," interrupted his mother firmly. "I saw her in a coffee shop in Brooklyn. She was drawing in a notebook. She looked different, thinner, but lighter too, as if she had taken a weight off her shoulders." Hector closed his eyes, imagining Marina sitting in a coffee shop, doing what she loved doing before he absorbed all her light. "Did you talk?" "Briefly. She didn't give me her address, and I didn't ask her for it. But she told me something. She said she loved you, Hector. Past tense. Loved. And that should scare you more than anything else." The words hit like a fist to the stomach. Loved. Doesn't love. Past. Finished. "But she also said something else," continued his mother. "She said that if ever, someday, you were to become again the man she met in the beginning, the man who really saw her, maybe you could talk. Maybe. It's not a promise, Hector. It's barely a possibility. And I'm not even sure she really believes it, but it's more than what you had yesterday." After hanging up, Hector stood looking at the phone. A possibility. It was more than he deserved. But how did he show her he had changed? How did he prove to her that he wasn't the same man who chose business over her again and again and again? He got up and left the office, ignoring the surprised looks of his team. It was 3 in the afternoon, and Hector Salvatierra never left before 9. But that man no longer existed. He walked through Manhattan without a destination, something he had never done. He had always had a purpose, a direction, a goal, but today he just walked, observing the city he had inhabited, but never really seen. Couples holding hands, parents playing with their children in the park, people simply existing without agendas or schedules. His steps took him, without consciously planning it, toward Brooklyn. He crossed the bridge, feeling the wind against his face, allowing himself to feel instead of think. If Marina was here somewhere, living a life he didn't know, he wanted to at least be in the same territory, breathe the same air. He entered a small coffee shop, the kind of place he would never have entered before, without high-speed Wi-Fi, without outlets for laptops, just small tables, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. He ordered a simple coffee and sat by the window, and then he saw her. Marina was on the other side of the street, walking with a cloth bag full of vegetables. She was wearing jeans and a simple jacket, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She looked so different from the polished and perfect woman who attended his corporate events. She looked real. She looked free. Hector stood up instinctively, almost dropping his cup. Every part of him wanted to run to her, stop her, beg her to listen. But he forced himself to stay still. She didn't want him to find her. She had made that very clear by erasing every trace of her location. Marina stopped in front of a bookstore and looked at the display window. Even from the distance, Hector could see the softness in her expression, something that had disappeared from her face in the last years of their marriage. She was healing, and he had no right to interrupt that with his own need for redemption. But then, as if she felt she was being watched, Marina turned her head. Their eyes met through the glass of the coffee shop and the street traffic. For a moment that seemed eternal. Neither moved. Hector saw the shock on her face, followed by something that could have been pain, or fear, or simply resignation. She didn't smile. She didn't approach. She only looked at him with those dark eyes that once looked at him with love, and now only showed caution. He raised a hand in a small wave, unable to do anything else. He wanted to scream to her that he had changed, that he missed her, that he was sorry more than words could express. But through the glass, amidst the noise of the city, he could only hold her gaze and hope she saw something different in him. Marina took a step back, clutching the shopping bag against her chest like a shield. Hector could see the conflict on her face, the part of her that maybe still felt something fighting against the part that had protected herself by leaving. She shook her head slightly, an almost imperceptible movement, and turned around. "No," whispered Hector, knowing she couldn't hear him. "Please, no." But Marina walked in the opposite direction, without looking back. Hector left the coffee shop, but by the time he reached the street, she had already disappeared into the crowd. He remained standing on the sidewalk, heart beating wildly, hands trembling. He had seen her. After 3 weeks of wondering where she was, what she was doing, if she thought of him. Finally, he had seen her, and she had walked away. But there was something else. In that brief moment when their eyes met, Hector saw something that gave him a spark of hope. She hadn't looked at him with hatred, not with indifference. She had looked at him with the kind of pain that only comes when there is still something to lose. That night, Hector didn't return to the Manhattan apartment. He rented a small room in a modest hotel in Brooklyn, the kind of place where he would never have stayed before. He lay on the bed that wasn't long enough for his legs and looked at the ceiling with water stains. Marina was miles away, maybe just streets away, living a life without him, healing from the wounds he had caused. And he was here, in a cheap hotel, finally feeling a fraction of the isolation she must have felt for years in his luxury apartment. His therapist had told him that real change didn't come from grand gestures, but from small and consistent decisions. Hector had begun making those decisions. He had reduced his workload by half. He had started walking instead of taking the car. He had started calling his mother just to talk, not to report achievements. He had started living instead of just existing to work. But was it enough? How did he demonstrate that the change was real when the person who needed to see it didn't want to be near him? At 2 a.m, his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. His pulse raced. "I know you saw me today. I don't know how you ended up in Brooklyn, but I need you to understand something. I'm not ready to talk. Not yet. Maybe never. I need you to respect that. Please." It was Marina. Finally, after 3 weeks of silence, she had made contact. Hector read the message again and again, memorizing every word. He replied with trembling hands. "I respect it. I promise. I just want you to know that I am changing. Not to win you back, although that is what I want most in the world, but because I realized I lost you, because I lost the version of myself that deserved to have you. I am finding that man again, even if it is too late. He sent the message and waited, watching the 3 dots indicating she was typing. They appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, her response arrived. "Don't do it for me, Hector. Do it for you. Because the man you were these last few years wasn't only killing me, he was also killing you." She was right, as she always was. Hector had been dying slowly, drowning in his own success, becoming a caricature of soulless ambition. And Marina, in her infinite wisdom, saw it even now. "Is there any chance?" he wrote, knowing he probably shouldn't ask, but unable not to. "Any future where we can meet again?" The answer took so long to arrive that Hector thought she wouldn't reply. But finally, his phone vibrated. "I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But I know this. If you have really changed, I will know. Time will tell. And if you haven't changed, I will also know. So don't tell me. Show me. With your actions, with your life. And maybe someday, when you least expect it, we can talk." Hector looked at the message until his eyes filled with tears that he finally allowed to fall. It wasn't a yes, but neither was it a definitive no. It was an opportunity, a possibility, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something resembling hope. 6 months, 180 days since Marina left the letter on the nightstand and closed the apartment door. 180 days of silent transformation that no casual observer would have noticed, but that had completely rebuilt who Hector Salvatierra was. Marina knew it before seeing him. She knew it because her mother mentioned casually that Hector had resigned as executive CEO of his company, keeping only a position on the board. She knew it because Clara told her she had seen him working as a volunteer at a homeless shelter on Saturdays. She knew it because Brooklyn was small enough for rumors to travel, and people talked about the millionaire who now lived in a modest apartment 3 streets away from hers, who walked to work, who frequented the same coffee shops and bookstores as common people, but hadn't sought her out. In 6 months, she had rebuilt her life piece by piece. She had gotten a job at a small design agency. She had exhibited her drawings at a local gallery. She had made friends who knew nothing about her failed marriage or her married name. She had learned to be alone without feeling lonely, and in all that time Hector had kept his promise. He hadn't contacted her. He hadn't appeared at her door. He hadn't made grand gestures. He had only lived his life in a way that gradually, inevitably, reached Marina's ears. Actions, not words, exactly as she had asked. It was a rainy autumn Friday when it finally happened. Marina was in her favorite coffee shop, the same one where Hector had seen her months ago, working on a design on her laptop. The rain beat against the window, creating a hypnotic rhythm that helped her concentrate. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and the sound of the wet city. Marina didn't look up until she felt a presence stop next to her table. "Can I sit?" Hector's voice, softer than before, less sure, completely lacking the authority that used to characterize it. Marina looked up slowly. He was soaked by the rain, without an umbrella, holding only a paper bag, with what seemed to be basic groceries. His clothes were simple, jeans and a jacket that had seen better days. His hair, normally perfectly styled, fell over his forehead in damp strands. He looked vulnerable. He looked human. He looked completely different from the man she had left. "Please," he added when she didn't respond immediately. "Just 5 minutes. If afterwards you want me to leave, I will leave." Marina nodded toward the empty chair, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Hector sat down carefully, as if he were afraid of scaring her. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I didn't know you were coming here," said Hector finally. "I'm not following you. I live nearby now. This is my way home." "I know," replied Marina softly. "This is a neighborhood coffee shop. It was inevitable that we would meet eventually." Hector nodded, looking at his hands. The same hands that once signed million-dollar contracts now had short and clean nails, but without the professional manicure. Hands that looked as if they really did things, touched things, lived instead of just managing. "I've wanted to talk to you 1,000,000 times," he said. I wrote messages I never sent. I stood in front of buildings where I thought you might be. But I promised to respect your space, and promises are the only thing I have left of credibility with you." Marina felt something move in her chest, pain mixed with something softer. She didn't answer, waiting. "My therapist says I shouldn't ask for your forgiveness," continued Hector, his voice barely audible over the noise of the rain. "He says forgiveness is something you give when you are ready, not something someone can demand. But I need you to know that I see you now. I see everything I didn't see before. I see the years I lost looking at screens instead of looking at you. I see all the times I chose a meeting over our anniversary. I see how you faded in front of me, and I was too blind to notice it." A tear rolled down Marina's cheek. She wiped it quickly, but Hector saw it. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said, his own voice cracking. "I don't deserve that. I just needed you to know that you are right. The man I wasn't only losing you, he was losing himself. And these last few months, living differently, being different, I found something I had forgotten existed. Peace. Real purpose. The ability to simply exist without having to conquer something." "Why did you resign as CEO?" asked Marina, needing to understand. Hector laughed humorlessly. "Because I realized I was running a race no one had asked me to run. I was building an empire to prove something to people I didn't even care about. And in the process, I lost the only person who did matter. I didn't resign for you, Marina. I resigned for me. Because I finally understood that success, without someone to share it with, is just an empty number in a bank account." The rain outside intensified, creating a curtain of water that isolated the coffee shop from the rest of the world. Inside, only the two of them existed, and 6 months of silence that was finally breaking. "I saw you at the gallery," admitted Hector softly. 3 weeks ago, your exhibition. I didn't approach. I just looked at your drawings from a distance. They were beautiful, Marina. You always knew how to create beauty. And I was so busy chasing money that I never asked you about your dreams. I never supported you. I never really saw you create." Marina closed her laptop, giving him her full attention. "You were there, in the back. I just wanted to see you shine. And you did. You shone in a way you never did when you were with me, and that told me everything I needed to know about how much I had dimmed you." "It wasn't just your fault," said Marina, surprising herself. "I also stopped fighting. I stopped asking for what I needed. I became an accomplice in my own disappearance." Hector shook his head. "Don't do that. Don't blame yourself for my failures. You tried. God, how much you tried. And I simply didn't listen." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people finally allow themselves to be honest, without defenses. "What do you want from me, Hector?" asked Marina finally. "Why are you here?" He looked her directly in the eyes for the first time since he sat down. "I don't want anything. I just wanted you to know that the man who promised you the world and then gave you crumbs no longer exists. And the man I am now understands that love is not something that is promised. It is something that is lived. Every day, in the small things, in being present, in really seeing the person you love." "And if it's too late?" whispered Marina. "And if the damage was too deep?" "Then I will learn to live with that," replied Hector. "Because even if you never forgive me, even if we never speak again after today, at least I know I became someone I can be proud of. Someone who understands that people are more important than empires, that presence is more valuable than power." Marina felt the tears flowing freely now. 6 months of carefully built walls were beginning to crack. For half a year, she had protected herself, healed herself, rebuilt herself. But a part of her, a part she had tried to ignore, had never stopped loving the man Hector had been in the beginning, the man who looked at her as if she were his whole world. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she said honestly. "I don't expect you to. Trust is earned, and I know it will take me time if I ever achieve it. but I am willing to try. Not with grand gestures or empty promises, but with consistent actions, with real presence, with the kind of love you deserve." Marina breathed deeply, feeling something change inside her. It wasn't instant forgiveness. It wasn't magical forgetting. It was simply the smallest opening, a crack in the armor she had used to protect herself. "There is a better coffee shop 2 streets down," she said slowly. "They make the best apple pie in Brooklyn. Do you want to walk with me there? Just to talk. No promises, no expectations." Hector's face lit up with a hope so pure it hurt to look at it. "I would love to." They went out together into the rain, walking side by side, but without touching. Hector didn't try to take her hand, didn't try to force intimacy he hadn't earned. He just walked at her pace, under the autumn rain, talking about simple things, books he had read, people he had met at the shelter, how he had learned to cook because eating alone in expensive restaurants felt empty. And Marina listened, really listened, looking for signs of the person he claimed to be now, looking for evidence that the change was real and not just a performance designed to win her back. In the new coffee shop, they shared apple pie and coffee while the rain continued outside. They talked for hours, not about the past, but about who they were now, 2 different people from who they had been 6 months ago. 2 people who had needed to break in order to rebuild themselves. When they finally parted on the sidewalk, as the rain turned into drizzle, Hector gave her a small, sad smile. "Thank you for giving me 5 minutes. They turned into 3 hours, but thank you." Marina smiled, feeling something warm expand in her chest. "Maybe we can have coffee again next week if you want." "I would love to," replied Hector. And in his eyes, Marina saw something she hadn't seen in years. Real hope, not arrogance, not certainty, just humble and vulnerable hope. "I don't promise anything," warned Marina. "I'm not asking for promises," replied Hector. "I'm just grateful for a chance. That is more than I deserve." They parted without a kiss, without a hug, just with the fragile possibility that maybe, eventually, they could find their way back to each other. Not to the marriage they had that was broken beyond repair, but to something new, something built on real presence instead of empty promises. Hector walked toward his modest apartment, feeling for the first time in his life that he had done something truly valuable. He hadn't closed a deal, he hadn't won a negotiation. He had simply been present. He had listened. He had been real. And Marina returned to her small studio, feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was room in her healed heart to let someone in again. Not the man who had hurt her, but the man he had become through the pain of losing her. Love, they both discovered that rainy night, wasn't about never failing. It was about learning, growing, and being willing to show up for real. Not with words, but with actions, not with promises, but with presence. And although the future was uncertain, although there were no guarantees, at least now there was possibility. And possibility, fueled by genuine actions and patient time, was where all great love stories began. Not with fireworks and grand romance, but with 2 people choosing each other, 1 day at a time, 1 cup of coffee at a time, 1 honest conversation at a time. Hector no longer promised to call when he landed. Now, he simply arrived. And that difference, that simple and real presence was everything.